Well, am I live? I think I am.
With any difficulty by any outside observers. And despite all of his health problems, he apparently spent much of his time active and hunting. However, at just 35 years old, his health had worsened significantly and he was suffering from senility and frequent seizures. 3 years later, Charles II passed away and the cause of his death is unclear. The official autopsy recorded that his heart was the size of a peppercorn, his lungs corroded, his intestines rotten and gangrenous, and he had a single testicle, black as coal, and his head was full of water. Again, take that with a grain of salt because this was 16th century medicine making the claims. Unfortunately, this would be the end of the Habsburg bloodline because Charles II seems to have been infertile. Despite having been married twice, he didn't father a single child. His second wife was even partly chosen because her family was famous for its fertility, but ironically, all of the effort to preserve the royal bloodline eventually had the opposite effect. As was confirmed by his autopsy, Charles had just a single atrophied testicle. With his death, the royal family was succeeded by a different family, and thankfully, today, this practice is mostly extinct.
Lovely. Good to know that he lived a life like a fucking pug.
In 1994, in the 100 days between April 7th and July 15th, it's thought that at least 500,000 people were killed in an event known as the Rwandan Genocide during the Rwandan Civil War. This was perpetrated by one of Rwanda's predominant ethnic groups known as the Hutu against another one of the large ethnic groups known as the Tutsis. The sheer number of individuals killed during this event is already staggering enough, but what makes it worse is that this was largely carried out by hand weapons such as machetes. And to make things even worse than that, these were often carried out by friends and neighbors who happened to be of the opposite group. Frequently, militias chased groups into schools and churches where they sought refuge, and individuals who refused to participate were simply killed for not cooperating. In addition to these brutal killings, as is often the case in war, there were large-scale assaults carried out on the female members of the Tutsi population. In the years following this 100-day terror, the population declined by up to 40% after either being killed in the conflict or due to individuals fleeing afterward. This decimated the infrastructure and left the country in complete chaos, and the after effects of this conflict are still felt throughout the country almost 30 years later. In the immediate aftermath, after the government regained control, there was mass incarceration of anyone involved. But even with a fully functioning system, there wouldn't have been nearly enough capacity to even arrest everyone, let alone hold them. Of the potential million that took part in some capacity, around 100,000 were jailed in the 2 years after 1994, which already completely overwhelmed the prison system. Under perfect conditions, the 19 prisons in Rwanda had a maximum capacity of just 18,000 inmates. This meant that every single one of those prisons was holding many times more than what they were designed to hold, and the conditions inside of them deteriorated proportionally. One of the most notorious of these is Gitarama Prison. Reports vary about its official capacity from just 400 to around 3,000, but given the conditions inside, it seems likely that it would be on the lower end of this. At its peak, it held close to 8,000 inmates, giving each of them just a half a square meter of space to sit or stand. Lying down was simply impossible. On the outside of the prison are brown brick walls with short pillars jutting out from the top. In the middle of this wall are a set of green metal doors which are the front entrance of the prison. Inside the prison, there is a single courtyard and a single blockhouse which is the only shelter for the inmates. With how many people there were inside, every room, hallway, and space looked like a packed concert where all of the men had to stand day and night. None of them had shoes or socks to stand on the wet, muddy ground that was covered in garbage and human waste. As a result of this, many got cuts and infections that led to foot rot and gangrene. This then led to numerous amputations of toes, feet, and even entire legs. Some of those with untreated infections also developed sepsis, giving them a sickly yellow color before death. Many of the others had burst eardrums, bites, bruises, and even broken bones from fights with